Nahuatl: Preservation and Evolution in the Phase of Conquest. Nahuatl is an ancient Mesoamerican language that over time has developed through contact with Spanish and other indigenous languages. It is mainly spoken in Central America with varying dialects across central Mexico. Nahuatl, as of 2015, shares approximately 1,730,000 speakers with 30 different dialects. Despite the rampant Hispanization prevalent in Mexican history, Nahuatl has retained a sizable portion of native speakers who are either predominantly monolingual in Nahuatl or bilingual in Nahuatl and Spanish. Most native speakers can be found in rural areas throughout Mexico, but through revitalization efforts and legislation, it is being accepted in more formal settings. Despite having a sizable number of speakers, the vulnerability of each dialect of Nahuatl varies between vigorous and endangered, each with its own subtlety and differences in grammar and phonology. In 2003, the Mexican government passed a federal law protecting the linguistic rights of Nahuatl speakers and guaranteeing access to basic education in the language. Despite that, the Hispanization of the country has been a general detriment to the revitalization of the language, and the implementation of the law varies between states. The Mexican government also counts Nahuatl for administrative and statistical purposes as a singular language. Lastly, the stigma that surrounds not just Nahuatl but all indigenous language lingers. Rampant discrimination at both the informal and formal level remains. Some parents say that they don't want their children to learn Nahuatl for fear of them being discriminated against. In Santa Ana, Tlacotenteco, a small pueblo in Milpa Alta, there are groups who work toward altering the apparent course of the language's disappearance, and they aim to do so by teaching it to the children of the community. Such groups exist nationwide in Nahuatl lands, with the effort seeking to breathe new life into the language. For example, the prevailing majority of native people still do not have access to basic education in their native language, whereas the implementation of national standardized testing clearly discriminates against non-native speakers of Spanish. Nahuatl is predominantly spoken in central Mexico in the following 16 states: San Luis Potosí, Hidalgo, Veracruz, Tabasco, Guerrero, Morelos, Puebla, Tlaxcala, el Distrito Federal, Estado de México, Nayarit, Colima, Jalisco, Michoacán, Durango, and Oaxaca. Modern Nahuatl is a descendant of Classical Nahuatl, the language originally used by the Mexica, or most commonly referred to as the Aztecs. The Aztec Empire held dominion over much of central Mexico during the 16th century, before the infamous conquest of the Spanish. The Aztec Empire was a wealthy collection of city-states, each with different tribes but unified in the Nahuatl tongue and ruled under the current Aztec monarch. The Aztec Empire was a very sophisticated society with phenomenal examples of architecture, agriculture, art, science, and cultural traditions. After the Spanish conquest of the Aztec Empire, the Nahuatl people remained under the control of the Spanish until the Mexican War of Independence. While under Spanish rule, the Nahuatl identity had begun to fade as assimilation seemed like the best option to retain their own states and aspects of their own religion under the state-mandated Catholicism. Through this assimilation, Nahuatl has remained in a constant fight against Spanish. Throughout the ages, the linguistic development of Classical Nahuatl has led to the 30 dialects that now inhabit central Mexico, three of which have gone completely extinct. Spanish remains as Nahuatl's killer language, with Spanish dominating almost every sector of Mexican life. Revitalization efforts vary between dialects and communities, some more successful than others. Some rural Nahuatl communities that inhabit central Mexico tend their own land and subsist on their own agricultural efforts. Common crops are maize, potatoes, mushrooms, beans, squash, coffee beans, and chiles. Throughout the isolation of these rural communities, artisans from these communities often craft textiles, footwear, candles, clothes, ceramics, etc., for their local economies. A traditional garment worn by Nawa women is the quetzaltili, consisting of cloth with a neckhole cut in the center. It is pulled on over the head and usually falls to a point in front and back. Originally seen in ritual contexts, it is now commonplace in daily life. Outside of local customs, the most recognizable Nawa tradition is the Day of the Dead. This tradition began as a ritual to honor the dead and assist them into Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. Through Catholicism and the passage of time, it has become a uniquely Mexican tradition, borrowing elements from both Aztec religion and Catholicism. Traditionally, one honors and helps the dead during the holiday by leaving an offering on a homemade altar. This offering is often the deceased's favorite food or drinks, bread, and other mementos that honor the departed's life. Originally, Nahuatl was an exclusively oral-based language without a writing system. The Nahuatl people would famously use pictographs and ideographs to record their belief system and history. When the Spanish began to occupy central Mexico, priests translated the phonetics of Nahuatl into Roman letters to better convert the Nahuatls. The following poem is by Nezahualcóyotl, a Nahuatl poet from ancient Mexico, with a translation and reading by John Curl.
Niketza totoweyu, Niketza totoweyu, Niki nechikowa aya, Tokniwan onin melelkiza, Nikin kwikatia, Tiyaske yeyukan, Chi kin amikikan, Chiyambo kiltonokan aya, and Tokniwan owaya, owaya. I erect our drum, I gather my friends, aya. Here they find recreation. I make them sing. Thus, we must go over there, to the other world. Remember this. Be happy. Ay, oh my friends, oh why, oh why. Perhaps now with calm, and thus it must be over there. Ay, perhaps there is also calm there in the bodiless place. Ay, oh why. Oh, why? Let us go. But here the law of flowers governs. Here the law of song governs. Here on earth, Ewaya. Be happy. Dress in finery, O friend. Oh, why? Oh, why?
Nahuatl, like many indigenous languages, is an agglutinative language, which differs from English, which is more of an analytic language. The difference being that Nahuatl connects grammatical particles without changing the morphemes. We will use the sentence below to compare the grammatical differences between Nahuatl and English. The example here is Nimitzlatlawis 25. Instead of morphing the word meets, meaning to you, in an English equivalent of will, it denotes future tense by adding the particle s to the word tlaxtlawi. The modern example above follows both the English and Spanish sentence order of subject-verb-object (SVO). In this example, ni, I, is the subject, and tlaxtlawi, to pay, is the verb that follows it. The object is the 25, 25, of something he will pay. An interesting aspect of this order is that classical Nahuatl was ordered more freely around the order of either verb subject object (VSO) or verb object subject (VOS). As the language developed, it took more Spanish grammatical elements. Modern dialects of Nahuatl vary phonetically based on geography and contact with other languages. The most notable suffix in Nahuatl between all dialects is. This sound is a lateral fricative that doesn't really exist in English. It sounds like the ul in the Welsh name Llewellyn. Some English speakers can pronounce it well if they try to pronounce the breathy ul in the word clue without the c in front of it. This absolutive suffix is sometimes omitted based on dialect and region. Thus, the initial law mandated in 2003 securing legal protection and recognition of native languages, the Mexican government has not done any official campaigns of revitalization and has left it to the several Nahuatl communities to do so. The remaining bastions of preservation past generational teachings are the various organizations and academic institutions found within Mexico. Most notably, Mexico's National Autonomous University, UNAM, Mexico City campus of Technological University of Monterrey, and Universidad Veracruzana Intercultural, UVI. These institutions offer Nahuatl language courses, and UVI offers a master's in the Nahuatl language and culture. Private and individual learning resources exist throughout Mexico. Groups in Milpa Alta include la Academia de Lengua y Cultura Nahuatl Tlacotenco. Organizations like Tule teach the language to young people through arranging work with older Nahuatl speakers who teach traditional oral local Nahuatl through daily activities such as working the fields. Past the simple transferring and use of the language, revitalization begins with destigmatizing the language and elevating its power despite the ever present colonizer ideologies found within Mexican society and government. Revitalization of Nahuatl requires fostering collaborations across academic, social, and ideological boundaries, as well as efficiently combining grassroots and top-down approaches. It is necessary to bridge the gap between theory and practice in revitalization, i.e., between the study and planning of revitalization in academic circles and the implementation of concrete programs, be they community-based, educational, or the direct result of governmental language policy. The urgent need to combine different levels of activities in the revitalization of native languages of Latin America, including the pedagogical, public, and socio-linguistic spheres, has already been emphasized, but it is high time to put it into practice.